The Club of Rome and the LearningPlanet Alliance came together in 2021 to form what has become the Ubuntu Learning Circle. From October 2022, a survey of our members and one-on-one meetings raised a unanimous call to co-construct the circle as a space dedicated to amplifying the voices and innovations of Africans and African youth across the continent. During our first festival session this January, the call to move from thinking to doing and doing boldly resonated with us all as the co-leads and the members of the circle. So in light of this, we commit the circle to being a space for a solidarity movement aimed at promoting the conditions to revolutionize education access, learning for sustainability, social innovation, and developing 21st century competencies led from the world's most youthful continent. And so we're going to get today's session started. It is the Africa Day session. That's why we started with some festivities, you know, as a celebration. Our agenda for today is as follows. I'm going to share my screen. There it is. Like most sessions, our agenda today is going to start with the welcome and introduction like I did earlier, and I'm going to continue now. And then we'll have interventions from our speakers who are joining us today to share more about their work. We're going to go into a plenary discussion to just, exchange, ask questions, gather more insights from the speakers, and maybe make contributions or ask critical questions of some of their interventions. Then we're going to go into our community updates and news for everyone to share with the circle about anything they'd like for everyone to know, anyone to participate in, and then we're going to go into some closing remarks. But just to elaborate a little bit more on Africa Day. So Africa Day, also known as African Liberation Day, is an annual commemoration that celebrates the formation and progress of the African continent. It serves as a reminder of Africa's rich history, diverse cultures, and the ongoing struggle for independence, unity, and development. The origins of Africa Day can be traced back to the founding of the Organization of African Unity, OAU, in May 25, 1963, so many years ago, which has later, in some senses, evolved into the African Union. Africa Day serves as a reminder that Africa's history and destiny are intertwined, and that the continent's progress relies on collective efforts, regional integration, and Pan-African cooperation. I'd even say Pan-African self-awareness and self-liberation and self-celebration. It symbolizes the ongoing struggle for freedom, justice, and equality while highlighting the immense potential and resilience of the African people. So today, we have joining us 3 speakers, I believe, in the theme of Africa Day, who are going to share more about their experiences. The first person to share is Sizwe Malinga, public speaker, youth advocate, and key collaborator to the Club of Rome Africa chapter. So Sizwe, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Nolita, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So I will begin. From a very young age, I always knew I was different. Born in 1997 to a community with wounds so deep that even Mandela's dream of a rainbow nation was like putting a band-aid on a broken heart. Survival was wearing a mask and assimilating, making sure to never question and follow the order of things. It felt like war, both internally and externally. Assimilating came with safety, and as a queer boy living in South Africa, I couldn't end up like some of my friends and other queers I'd end up meeting in the future, being mere stats on our dead tolls. So mask it up, boy, and choose your character for the day. Bessel van der Kolk best describes the township experience in his book called The Body Keeps the Score, open quote. In today's world, your zip code, even more than your genetic code, determines whether you will lead a safe and healthy life. People's income, family, housing, employment, and educational opportunities affect not only their risk of developing traumatic stress, but also their access to effective health, close quote. Majority of my time in university was spent on the ground fighting, as well as in lecture theaters learning. Cape Town liberated me. It told me it was okay to be different. Here, it felt like I wouldn't get killed for choosing to kiss another man. Cape Town, like many other South African cities, was a microcosm of many lived realities across our beautiful rainbow nation. And this is one of those stories. My high school had prepared me to fit the mold. I spoke good enough English, followed the rules, and assimilated. It showed me the good and the bad, But what was most important to me was the space it gave me to fight for my people and how they listened, even if it was behind closed doors. I know I left my mark. Like many other Model C schools and educational institutions, all of them were scared to embrace change. Model C schools were former whites-only schools that were changed to incorporate Black children after liberation. These schools had swimming pools, gyms, huge rugby and hockey fields, a canteen, access to technology, and many more facilities. There are very few schools in the townships today that have any of these facilities. And still, today, these schools have a far superior education system to the schools in the townships and rural areas. But remember, change is scary, change is uncomfortable, and change is messy. Nelson Mandela's famous quote, "Education is the most important weapon which you can use to change the world," rings on the lips of many politicians, yet little work is being done to improve the lives of people in disadvantaged communities. On June 16, 1976, South Africa and the world witnessed one of the most impactful protests during the apartheid era, where more than 20,000 high school students protested against the introduction of Afrikaans as the medium of instruction in local schools. In 2016, 40 years later, the youth take to the streets, this time against the inflated cost of higher education. Hashtag fees must fall. Sitting in my lecture theater, I could hear the song Phambili ngeWar, Phambili ngeChimoreng, forward with the war, forward with the revolutionary struggle. Feeling the adrenaline rushing through the most visceral parts of my being, I walked out and joined the protest. Lectures were shut down, universities across the country were shut down, and students were marching for a deeper cause. They were marching for social justice. In the marching crowd, I absorbed the emotions of each and every student there. I didn't even know the songs, but 2 minutes in, I could hear my squeaking voice leave my mouth with such confidence. I could feel the unified vibration from the tar under my feet to the air that pumped my heart. My family would call me every night asking if I was safe, making sure I wasn't getting involved in the protest. My scholarship donors and mentors would call me to remind me that my involvement could have undesirable consequences on my career. They all feared for my safety and future. But when I was in that crowd amongst all those voices, I could hear only 2 words: social justice. I will never forget the day all of Western Cape University students put their bodies on the line outside the South African Parliament in October 2016. The atmosphere was surreal, with armed police, police vans, police dogs, passionate protesters. The speech delivered by one of the politicians didn't sit well with us, so we started singing and chanting protest songs. Then suddenly, stun grenades, rubber bullets, scattered crowds, and screams of a dying protest. Some of us were lucky to make it back to our residences unharmed. My room moved from being a community hall to a deserted hospital. The aftermath of the protest was upon us. Now I was the one knocking on people's doors and checking up on their mental well-being, because somehow I felt like this was a task I could take on. Sessions upon sessions of me living in their shoes, walking through some of their trials and tribulations. I decided to ask the university to revive the mentorship program, because the protest had opened up personal wounds and students were drowning in a whirlwind of internal conflict. It was a struggle for some to get appointments from the overwhelmed student wellness system. If I was not facilitating workshops or checking up on mentors, I was figuring out ways to ensure no students were left behind in the cracks of a failed system. Struggling to maintain the school-life balance I had preached in my workshops, I had enough leadership roles to give me access to the decision makers. On this side of the table, I could feel my voice slowly losing grip. Change seemed harder to get an audience. It was wrapped in bureaucracy and maintaining the status quo. I remember receiving a check-in call from one of my late mentors. "How are you?" I quickly reached for the generic response to his question. "Sizwe, tell me exactly, how are you?" I couldn't hold back from voicing my frustrations, he interrupting my venting session by making me recall the moment he was pushing for change in my high school alma mater and how I questioned his style of leadership. Somehow we all wanted to embrace change, but were scared of what it would bring. In a few years' time, the country will be going to flames. I shall be carrying my granddaughter while I stand by my bulletproof wall in my well-equipped neighborhood. My granddaughter will ask me, "Pa, what did you do to stop the country from burning?" He had watered the seed he had planted a few years back. Around the same time as the Fees Must Fall movement, Black learners at schools were mobilizing around uncomfortable conversations regarding discrimination and inclusivity in schools. Black schoolgirls at Model C schools were restricted as to how they were allowed to wear their hair. The natural look of the afro was frowned upon, and in some cases, the girls were severely punished for wearing their hair in a natural African way. It was bigger than just the afro. It spoke to how the education system had failed to restructure its code of conduct and policies to make sure that people of color felt like they belonged. Now it was high school students fighting against injustice. The youth were once again warriors for change. Yet injustice in South African schools did not just come from restrictive hair rules, but systemic rules that made it nearly impossible to access a good quality education if you were poor. Black students were denied admissions because of the 10-kilometer radius rule, which was a preferential right to admission for learners. The rule gave school management an excuse to turn down students' applications on the basis that they lived beyond the 10-kilometer radius from where the schools were located. It meant students like myself who lived in the townships needed to be super special to be considered for placement. Inferior government schools perpetuated the generational cycle of poverty. Model C schools were where you wanted to end up to have a better chance at a brighter future. This was an unbearable injustice that I stood against throughout my schooling career. It was clear that the system was broken from within and more needed to be done to make schools in post-apartheid South Africa a place for all, black or white, rich or poor. School Where I Belong is a project that was dedicated to healing the wounds of the past in a progressive way. The project provided a safe space for students, teachers, and management to address the topic of what it meant for students of color to feel like they belonged. We toured across various schools in the country and provided a platform for uncomfortable conversations around transformation and inclusivity. I could see my own reflection in the eyes of the young people we met. The history of South Africa is fragmented, and the stories of pain are yet to be understood. From the youth of 1976, we learned that standing up against the system meant standing together as one. 40 years later, the same fire and fierceness flows in the veins of the African children. After all, before you stands a mere queer township boy with big dreams and a hope for a better tomorrow, where we walk in the footsteps of those who came before us. Yes, change is uncomfortable. Yes, change is messy, but change is healing. One voice alone cannot break the shackles of the past, but together we shall build a socially just world where every voice matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Sizwe. Thank you for such a powerful intervention. I'm reflecting on that. Your intervention spoke a lot on framing this as sort of a revolutionary struggle. And I know you weren't here in last month's session, but in the interventions by Emery and Pasco, they were speaking about their work in getting their governments to bring in learning for sustainability, and how sometimes it was such an uncomfortable process because you just needed to go protest. So I'm bringing that to the fore to say this is becoming a recurring theme in our discussions in the circle about what it means to fight for change and what it means to fight for something to be different. Our next speaker will be Ibrahim Yunus, who is a junior fellow of the World Academy of Arts and Sciences. Ibrahim, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Nolita, for having me. Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining me this afternoon on this very important August event, the African Day. Whenever we hear the word African Day, a lot of things come to mind. People begin to reflect on the stories, on the bedtime stories we've been told, on history books, on the things we've read in the past, and the current realities in our world today. I mean, many, many years ago, a lot has happened to the African people all across board, from discrimination to racism, and it continues to happen up until today. For me, anytime I hear the word African Day, or I hear anything that has to do with the Black History Month, people like the suicide happened, the incessant killing of a Black man in the United States comes to mind. But this is not the conversation for today. I would like to share some personal reflections on my own particular story. In the winter of 2021, I had the privilege of being invited and coordinated under the leadership of the former president of Latvia, Whittaker. And we had a one-on-one conversation with her, and that really changed the whole perspective I have of the world and myself. Never in my little thoughts do I think that a young boy from a township in Nigeria can have the privilege of sitting with a president of a European Union country. And here I am. During our conversation, one of the first things she asked me was, Ibrahim, can you tell me the first situation where you find yourself in leadership position? Who asked you to be a leader? How did it proceed? Was it interesting? Were you happy? I have never, ever had anyone closer to me in school or anywhere sit me down to ask me these questions in this hierarchy. Were you happy? How did it proceed? Was it interesting? Trying to reflect on those questions today, I'd like to share some of the thought I did share with her. Of course, I was happy. I began narrating stories of whenever I was invited to be a leader. I remember when I was in high school, when I was in primary school, I was telling all the tons of stories of how I was invited to be a leader, from when I was class monitor to when I was invited to be head boy, or the interview went. But all this, to me, at those points in time, were just pouring out of elation, because here I'm seated in a European country with a European former president. But does that really matter? In my mind, I was thinking, because if I have been privileged, I don't know how to got myself to this position. What about millions of young people who are on the continent who doesn't even know the direction to their way to the top, not even what they're going to eat, not even how they're going to project their life in the next, for the next decade. So it got me thinking that how do we begin to change the mindset? But it's not just about the mindset. It's easy for everyone to talk about changing narrative, changing mindset, reorienting, changing the story. All doesn't matter. What does matter is intergenerational dialogue. We need to begin to mend between the old and the new. Our past leaders, the likes of Madiba, Kwame Nkrumah, we can only read about them in history books. Fortunately or unfortunately, in my country, we're not even allowed to learn history. Nowhere in a Nigerian secondary school or high school do you find people teaching history or students learning history. All of the things I learn about leadership and about past leaders from my country, on the African continent and all around the world, were self-learning. Nobody ever sat me down to tell me that this happened or this is when this happened, because they were trying to close down the story and change the narrative. So what is my indulgence? As we celebrate this year's African Day, I'd like to call on the older generation of African leaders to provide 3 criteria of things for young people. 1, coaching. 2, mentorship. And 3, sponsorship. What a typical African person do need is a sponsor, a coach, and a mentor. There are 3 different things. Some are so experienced enough to open the world to them and introduce them to the realities of today. We can only solve our problems, our challenges, and be able to build the Africa of our dream by engaging and, deliberating, collaborating, and partnering. And what do I mean by that? I would like to say this clearly on air. If today, in 2023, we have a lot of Africans still afraid to go to southern part of Africa because of some stereotypic, xenophobic cause that have been attention on that particular part of the world, do you still think we're going to find a way to build the Africa of our dreams. I believe we need to begin to see ourselves through the realities of ourselves rather than beginning to just see ourselves as threat. We need to start partnering to foster collaboration and be able to grow. And this is why I have decided that for the next coming years, I'd be working with the African Union office, the UNESCO office at the African Union, Dr. Rita, to ensure that we begin training, we begin to foster teaching and training leadership classes for younger Africans. Storytelling is an important skill. Negotiation is an important skill. And I believe leadership is the top most important skill. When we talk about soft skill, we talk about technology, the world is changing, but these three skills that I just mentioned are critical as to our paramount progress and development as a continent. How do we tell our stories? And how do we negotiate when we have challenges, being presented to us? And what kind of leaders are we? And the young people are not too young to be leaders. We tend to see leaders as politicians on the continent. Throughout my life, I never knew that growing up, what I was displaying as a kid was leadership. Because for me, I've always looked up to the governor, the president, and the senators as the leaders. And the same applied to almost all of the young Africans out there. Most of the people only believe until they hold a political position, they don't see themselves in position or where they're in a position where they can make significant impact or change. And this is why I'd like to indulge all the leaders here today and those who are not even here, if the message gets out there, that try as much as you can in your little capacity, be able to mentor, take someone, just one or two people under your wings, as you will be able to give them the opportunity to grow and foster development. I thank you so much for the opportunity to share some of my thoughts. And I do hope to foster engagement with some of my colleagues and all the participants here today. Thank you, Nolita, for inviting me. And I do hope we have an amazing session going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for what you have shared. I noted quite a bit on the point of leadership. But we're not going to go into questions now. I do have a question for you, probably linking to also something that Sizwe said on this point of leadership, particularly for transformation. But before we dive into that, our last speaker is the LearningPlanet Youth Fellow, Tom Ogalo, and someone who also joins the circle pretty regularly. So Tom, I'm really excited to hear more from you. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. And I'm really sorry for joining the meeting a little bit late because I'm engaged in a field study with young people. Today, we are trying to mark the World Menstrual Hygiene Day. It's a pre-event, so yeah. Perfect. I'm Tom Ogalo. I am a youth council member with you, LearningPlanet. And other than that, I also work with World Ocean Day as a youth council member too. And I'm the director of Jijenge Youth Organization, and I work in Kenya. So when this particular call for me to be a speaker in this particular conversation came, I was like, what am I doing as a young African to be able to help other young African to be able to realize their full potential? And therefore, with your permission, I'll be able to share with you some of the interventions that I, as a young person and as a young leader, I am engaged in, and some of the things that I do to be able to ensure I have a better Africa. So it's not really a presentation because I don't work on presentations, but it's really whatever I do. And one thing that currently I'm working on is trying to promote African literacy. And when I talk about African literacy, it's a matter of I'm trying to come up with community libraries. And my community libraries are geared towards trying to promote mostly African literature. And this is practically to be able to first also appreciate the point of view of our fellow African writers, and also to appreciate their work, because for the longest time we have been using colonizers' literatures to be able to inform our decisions and to be able to inform our learning. So I want to bring this particular change where we as young Africans, we can be able to use African literature to be able to understand our African context and also to be able to come up with solutions as per our African context. So far, I've been able to work or develop 3 community libraries. And the essence of me developing these libraries also was to also ensure that young people, mostly in the rural areas, probably don't have access to certain books, are able to access these books. And in our community libraries, we also seek to ensure we provide technological services. And that's why we have tablets that are tailor-made to ensure that young people in our community are able to use tech to be able to find information. And this information that they get, they can be able to use it to also empower other people who don't have access to it. Have you engaged in the circle before? I think most of you are aware that I work with street connected children. And the reason why I work with these street connected children is because I do tend to link them up with children affected with emergencies, because at one point or another, this child came to the street, not by wish, but because they were affected with 1 or 2 issues back home. So I have a program, it's a street learning program, where I teach street connected children from their bases, and their bases means where they live and where they survive on their day-to-day basis, where they work, where they stay, and the streets where they engage in. So for this particular program that I do with street connected children, most of them are African children automatically, I try as much as possible to ensure that I instill the aspect of leadership and knowledge to them, so that as they are still in the street, they are able to probably make informed decisions. And some of this informed decision will play a critical role in influencing them to leave the street, to go back home and seek other safe care options that are available within our country and also within their communities. So the whole essence of that is instill knowledge, instill leadership, and have a change in mindset in regards to them leaving the street and going back home. For the Street Connected Children Learning Program, I have a reach of at least 300 children on a weekly basis. I do that every weekend on a Saturday. And after that, I also try to offer psychosocial support to these particular children to be able to also help assess their needs and also get to hear how they manage various issues that come up when they live and stay in the street. For the longest time, I've also been doing advocacy, and this is virtual advocacy through Twitter Spaces, Twitter chats, and also through podcasts. And the reason why we do this is because we appreciate that as Africans, we have from so I tend to have this spaces to ensure that we really have stability, professionals, and also those planet are expert in various areas to be able to knowledge. So we have ranging topics, but the main space that really touched me was a discussion on access of education by those affected with emergencies. And this I was trying to now focus on because I live around Lake Victoria. We have been having high cases of flooding, and with flooding, it means that more young people won't be able to access education. So we have been trying to find solutions that how best can we help these children affected with emergencies, such as floods and also war-zone areas, to be able to access and have an interrupted study, even though they're affected with these calamities. And from these discussions, we realized that other than just us depending on the educational system provided by government and the old traditional system that has been there for the longest time, we can always make use of our elders. And by using our elders, practically, I mean, we try to knowledge is being passed in the traditional past. We try to pass this knowledge from our generation to the other generation through storytelling and also peer-to-peer learning. So that's one really worked on, came out best during our online advocacy that we had for children and education access in places that have been affected in emergencies. Other than that, I provide a platform for other young people. I like reading, so I provide a platform to be able to also come read. So I have a books club where I invite individuals to come in, and in the process of us doing these book clubs, our book club do focus more on African literature. I have keen interest in African literature. So we try to bring in individuals to be able to read African literatures, and in the process of us reading these African literatures, we hope that we are able to gain new skills and also have change of mindset in regards to the books that we read and also the information that we access in all available platforms. Yeah, all that said and done, I would like to say a big thank you for taking your time to listen to me throughout. Thank you so much, and happy Africa Day.
Thank you, and happy, well, Africa Day is on the 25th, but happy Africa Day to you too. Yeah, thank you. We are now entering into the discussion part of our gathering today. So like a Q&A, as per usual, to please feel free to either ask a question on the chat or to raise your hand and to ask a question. As the moderator, I tend to use my privilege of moderator to ask the first question while everyone is gathering their thoughts about what they would like to discuss. So I had teased this with Ibrahim when he was speaking on the work that he's doing on leadership. And a question I had for you is that it's very exciting to see this focus that you have on leadership and the work you're doing with UNESCO and AU. Question I have is that I have also heard in the space a lot of people speaking about there's so much investment into mentorship and leadership into Africa. But for some reason, it's still falling short into creating the type of systemic transformation that, you know, we're hoping for and we're speaking about here in this circle, in this call. So my first question was, what do you see as the role of leadership in systemic change? And also, what about your approach to learning about leadership do you think is going to help bridge that gap between learning about the skills of leading versus leading for systemic change? Deep one, but I had that on deck as soon as you said it. Yeah.
All right, Nolita, thank you. So as you already mentioned, the role of leadership in systemic change, it's like you answered the question. For us to be able to fix the current challenges, for instance, let me use it that way, we need to understand what really went wrong and what is the changing of the dynamics on leadership. I mean, we cannot say that how leadership was, how leadership was carried out, let me just use it that way, in the 90s is the same way that will be carried out in a world that is more globalized. So when you're trying to bridge the gap, what you need is an intergenerational dialogue. And what do I mean by intergenerational dialogue? Where the old and the younger people will come together, and they are not coming together to debate. No, the older generation will be able to share their experiences, and the new generation will be able to tell them their challenges, and they will be able to work it out together. Like, for example, what the co-president of Club of Rome did during the St. Gallen Symposium was amazing. I wasn't in St. Gallen, but the leadership training, the way she was able to engage the young people through her presentation on the panel is just the typical example of what I want to see. And the work I intend to do with the AU, it hasn't started yet. It will start, and I will let you know then, is going through countries on the African continent, going through working with their Ministry of Education, training trainers, because it's not easy to bring younger people in a room and just have a conference and that's it. No, leadership will be included in the curriculum. This is why it's going to come through the AU. It's not going to be me, it's not an NGO work, it's going to be a policy work, in the sense that leadership will be included in the curriculum. And then the approach to leadership is not just going to be leader in political spaces, how to be leaders, especially in challenging times on a continent like Africa. This is when the knowledge of history will be useful to all of us. Rather than learning history and be ranting and be angry and be frustrated about the events that happened, we'll be able to say, okay, what happened has already happened. Now, how do we fix it? So the leadership position or the leadership classes or the leadership trainings are not going to happen as just leadership and people seated in classrooms. And no, it's going to be through fostering dialogue between trainers and the people who will be training. So trainers will have the opportunity to engage those leaders of the past, and they will be those people in charge to listen to them, gain from their experiences, design a model, and go back and distribute this in classrooms. Because we tend to talk about the limiting factors of classroom education and how African education needs to change, but we still cannot. I haven't seen a new model that we can say, oh, what I always propose is that learning shouldn't be restricted to classrooms, right? It could be under the tree, it could be evening, it could be summer classes. People should just ensure that they are learning something. So it should be flexible and accessible. It shouldn't be so executive leadership kind of program. No, it's going to be a flexible and open dialogue where people can get to ask questions, but they may not have the opportunity to engage these leaders directly, but those leaders who have been able to have conversation with the these people in policy will be the one to channel the course. So it's just going to be an hierarchical, step-by-step method of approach. I hope that answers your question.
It does. And I see Barbara also had a second question that she asked in the chat. I don't know if you want to unmute and ask it, or if you prefer I ask the question.
Sure. Yeah. So yes, I so appreciated the references to intergenerational dialogue. And I just want to underscore how important I think it is. And I'm wondering, where are the exemplars? Who in Africa is doing this? Which countries, which people, which institutions? And I ask it for two reasons. One is time has moved so quickly, and I think it's so important for all generations to enrich each other's perspectives. And additionally, I'm just doing a course on trauma-informed therapy. And I'm really struck by how much ancestral trauma, I'm actually asking a third question. To what extent is the AU and any other organizations in Africa really using trauma-informed strategies to empower people of all generations? Sorry, that was a few questions. I'm quite excited by this topic.
Thank you. To answer your first question, where you mentioned the examples of organizations hosting leadership programs, if I'm not mistaken, I'd like to just quickly reference to the work that the African Leadership Academy is doing. The African Leadership University has been, the academy is for the younger people and the university is for the adolescents and the adults who are in the university. Is a typical prototype or a typical example of a platform that has been well utilized. In as much as it's a university setting, they don't only base it based on learning. But thank you, Fred Swanika, amazing. Thank you for referencing that. He has been really, really doing a very great job with the platform, and a lot of young people are benefiting from that. If we can have a replication of this across board, I vehemently, strongly believe that the leadership challenge that we are going through on the continent will be reduced by a very larger percentage. I don't want to say so percent because there's no concrete evidence to that, but by a very larger percentage. And when you look at the But when you look at organizations like the African Union, most of the time, we as Africans tend to belittle the platform we have, the AU platform. I remember when I was having a conversation with a colleague, and the next thing he said is, oh, those people, and he just called the organization. Whether we like it or we do not like it, African Union still remain the most important platform, just as the UN remained the most important platform to serve the world. African Union still remain the one on the most important platform to serve the African people. And this is why whenever we have a concrete idea, we have, proposals, we need to see how we can keep engaging them continuously. It could be difficult. It could be, very challenging because we need to get our leaders on their toes. And this is why I'm getting in to start with them. I do not work with the African Union, so I might not be in the best position to answer the second question. But I believe some of the people who work in there, like Dr. Rita, Fatima Mohammed, who is the AU ambassador to the UN. I mean, Fatima attended the same university that I did attend, EBU Zaria, before she got to start working at the AU and all that. So little connection do matters. Sometimes they are in those positions, but they become so distracted or not ill-informed of the reality outside of the shores of the building. So, and this is why I would like to engage every young person working on something. We have the AU Youth Envoy. They might seem like they're not active, but we should keep engaging them as we move forward in our conversation, because the whole idea of what we are doing all together as young people is to achieve a singular result, which is a profitable outcome for all of the African continent. So we shouldn't think that we should neglect them that because it hasn't been active in the last decade, but we should try and see how we can collaborate and foster a relationship that will in the end benefit us all. So anyone working on a project should be very free to address it to the African Union, to the African, to ensure that this conversation are going on. So I think, yes, if I do answer your question, to let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibrahim. I actually want to now direct a question towards Sizwe, especially with what you have you had just mentioned now, because it's there. You were speaking about, sometimes people do underestimate the work that could be done by organizations like the AU, et cetera, et cetera. Sizwe, in your intervention, you speak a lot about the work you had been doing in terms of a grassroots movement, working to influence what is an institution, et cetera. Because I think in the leadership conversation, leadership comes from all different types of places, and that's why we speak about collaboration, et cetera, et cetera. But also in your framing, Sizwe, you mentioned access to decision makers and solidarity as being two things that were critical to that. Could you please give an example of something that made this apparent to you? The access to decision makers and solidarity part, and some of your frustrations. You mentioned frustrations, but you didn't dive too deep into what they were. Can you please share some of those?
Thank you, Nolita, for the question. I think starting from high school, I think I was in a privileged position of being a young Black person who was blessed with leadership qualities. I would engage with the headmaster and management on policies that were in place back then when it was still during apartheid times. And for me, it was always a question as to how, haven't they changed the system? You would get students and other, parents complaining about, how their children don't feel like they belong. The teachers would say the, kafa, which is an equivalent derogatory term to the N-word in the US. So for me, it troubled me because I could see, the passion and anger from people like myself. And in schools like that, where they hold, such great white power, you can't be the angry Black child. But with me, I had the access to sit down with them. I would, have debates with my fellow brothers in the school, and then I would go and report to the headmaster, because sometimes people go into these positions they go into these positions, but they had policies that have been in place for a long time. So it becomes difficult to just come in and change the policy. So I had that understanding that sometimes it's not the person who is leading who has a problem with change, but it's the policies and the people that stand behind that policy. And in university, I questioned a lot of leadership qualities that our former vice chancellor had. I would engage in talks with various departments, and I sat in the Futures think tank, where we, unpack what it means, what education means, especially when COVID hit us, what it means for students and children that don't have access, because in Africa, we still face a lot of problems regarding access to technology, access to so many things that are crucial to, growing the Black child. And mental health as well it spoke a lot to, I think someone asked a question about the trauma. It spoke a lot about the trauma that we haven't addressed as, and as institutions, because you have, kids going to universities where it's predominantly white people and they come from rural schools. So the language barrier also becomes a big thing, and then they face mental health and people don't understand why so. So one of the projects that I'm currently, planning on working on is tackling the question of what it means, what happened to the Black family, because I think it's important for us to understand the root problems of what happened, for us to engage in conversations of how do we grow, the African people. So this dialogue that I'm planning on putting through will tackle that question in 3 phases. So the first phase would be understanding and uncovering what happened to us. So colonial times, apartheid times, what happened? And then the second phase would be creating new stories and telling new stories of, what potentially Africa could turn out to be. And the third would be planning for future of Africa. Because those are important. I went to an event not so long ago where I was sitting with a Zambian gentleman and a Botswanian gentleman, and they said, I hate how South Africa hates other African countries. And Yunus touched on this point. It all stems back to what happened back there. The reason why South Africans hate, other African countries is it's a topic on its own that needs to be addressed. If we're going to move, forward as an African people, we need to unite. This is a great platform for us to start having these conversations, because they are crucial. We can't, things have to work hand in hand. So we need to unpack what happened and also have mentorship programs, coaching programs, leadership programs, where, those two combined can, have an impactful change and difference to, what we're all struggling to address at this moment. Because Africa is a beautiful country. I mean, look at me being American. Africa is a beautiful continent, and it has beautiful people and amazing people. We are one of the friendliest people, especially here in Durban. There's rich culture and diversity, and there's so much we can do. I'm not saying we're going to become the future Wakanda, maybe, but something close to Wakanda. But if we get the foundations right, love, respect, and kindness is a principle that everyone should know. But if we get those cultural foundations right and those dialogues, intergenerational dialogues, it's highly important. But with those, conversations, we have to have things moving. It can't just be talk. And I do understand sometimes you have to talk and have discussions, but there's the importance of having programs where you talk while doing is very important. That's how collaboration should work. I hope I answered your question, Nolita.
Yes, you did. And two things have happened now. I see your comment on the chat, but also your comment very much links to a theme that's recurring between all of the interventions, which is about policy versus outside the classroom ways of learning and teaching leadership, or developing the learner, etc., etc. If you don't mind, Anne, I would actually really like for you to please share what you were speaking about in the chat, and maybe share also an example of what you're sharing there. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I really love being here and hearing all your beautiful, wise words. And I speak, well, as the intergenerational dialogue, I'm really happy to share my experience with young people. But at the same time, and just for your information, I have launched a project in Europe where I take it out of the hands of the professors and give it into the hands of the students, of the learners themselves, to learn about sustainability. And Raad is one of my alumni, if I may say. So I think that's the proof that it has real potential. So it's really, and I almost must say, I speak with a lot of modesty here because I come from the European continent. We thrive because we exploited the rest of the world, and I'm deeply, deeply conscious of that. And I feel, I also feel that we also know that the Western, our countries are way overshooting the planetary boundaries, yet we call ourselves more developed, whereas nations that remain within the planetary boundaries, we call them in development. And so I would like to sort of shift that idea around and say but maybe the countries that are able to create well-being within the planetary boundaries, they are more developed, and then Europe should learn from them. So that's where I think, I'm hesitating to share my experience in Europe as something that may be useful for you, but I do think, how you mobilize young people, some of it was already said. You create a vision, and then once we call it the travel guide to the future. And once you have that vision, you always learn in teams. It's a way, I think it was Barbara who asked it, it's a way to implement systems thinking without doing it theoretically in a classroom. Bring together a team of learners that come from different corners of the system, engineers and social scientists, but also farmers, go outside, those are the classrooms. So we take the students, or we started taking the students through 1 year of learning together, discussing, looking at books, doing field trips, coming up with a vision and coming up with a proposal, just a proposal, a design, and that really empowers them. And so after 1 year, they said this really changed my life. It changed my outlook on the future. I want to share this experience with my peers. And so they start doing the same process again. It's not product oriented. Of course, there is a real learning happening, but it's mainly wow, by envisioning together, by discussing it among peers, from different perspectives, different cultural, disciplinary, gender perspectives, then you start understanding the complexity of the system. And within that complexity, the challenge is to do one proposal. What does the museum look like in the future? What does food look like in the future? What does money look like? And it doesn't have to be the truth, but it has to be a vision that you can identify with. And that in itself empowers people. So I'd be really, really happy, again, in all modesty, because I think that the unlearning in Europe is different from the learning in Africa. We're outside of the donut economy, and I think in Africa, you need to, you're more into the needing to grow into the donut, where we have to reframe from, getting beyond the donut. So I'm really not here to say hey, I have a solution for you, but I would be really happy to explore if and how, or under what conditions we can join forces, intercontinental, intergenerational. I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you, Anne. I want to make a note that a critical element to this is that the transformation that we speak about has to be a mutual transformation between all of the relationships in which Africans, young or mature, have with the rest of the world. And so it is also about learning to get into a point of collaboration that is not an extractive type of collaboration, or actually something that is mutually beneficial, and a mutual transformation of all parties involved, Europe to Africa, America to Africa, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's an important part of that. We speak in terms of intergenerational dialogues, but there is also an element of the future generations of Europe versus the future generations of Africa. What types of futures are they expecting? And can this be created in a collaborative manner? Or is it then done in separate, because we are framing things in a way where some people have to feel guilty about X, Y, Z, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, we had this conversation about 2 weeks ago about humanizing, et cetera, et cetera. Moving from, you know, looking at leadership from a radical transformation element type of leadership. So in this, I want to make a book suggestion, because this book has been coming up quite a lot on Radical Transformational Leadership by Monica Sharma. I'm listening to it. It is pretty good about having this conversation about what does it look like and what are the opportunities, etc. Pascal, I see you have your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Nolita, for this opportunity. My concern, it's all about from Yunus's speech. Okay, he was talking about developing leadership academies and stuff that would foster leadership improvement among the African youth. Okay, well, okay, some of the ground details that have been, or some of the research that we have found out, especially in the African continent, in some countries. Okay, there are some countries where you find that the leaders, the political leaders in power, they are against such ideas. Okay, you talked about incorporating the leadership training skills in maybe like in the education curriculum, but we know that there are some countries where the political leaders have come in public and tried to ban such kind of development, especially in educational curriculum. Yeah, we have some countries where the political leaders, like the president, those in charge, came and banned some kind of there's a country where they banned like something like political science simply. And to me, I think that will be something that is discouraging leadership. Right? So in your program, like in the Leadership Academy, maybe you should try to consider on how you can overcome such kind of challenges in some countries, because it is also challenges where you find leaders who are in power are discouraging. They don't want others, the young generation especially, be part. So you should see how you can design it, integrate it, the solutions in case you encounter it. Maybe if you are planning to run that program on a large scale and on a long-term basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Pascal. Sorry, I'd taken camera off to make sure that we're not adding additional weight to your bandwidth. Ibrahim, I'm not sure if you had like a response to that provocation, or it's just like, maybe you'd like to, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Pascal. I actually got the point. I really want to emphasize that I mentioned this pretty early in my presentation, until we begin to understand that negotiation is the only way forward. I mean, what we do not get, was it Gandhi that said, what you do not get through negotiations and peace and dialogue, you cannot get it through force. So I think I agree with him. Our political leaders have a role to play, and they have been really undermining the advancement that we are supposed to make in terms of, training trainers, leadership, history, and all that. They try to undermine it, but we still want to believe that negotiation can really pave way. This is why I'm trying to see how we can work with strong bodies like the AU and see how we can influence policies through dialogue, not revolution. We need to start to call on their attention on the importance and the value of some of these programs. And it's not just going to be an NGO kind of program. And this is why I said it earlier. I think we should understand that it's going to be academic, and at the same time, it's going to go outside of the academic. So it's going to be a two-way thing. We're training the trainers, and it's not me, it's not Yunus, it's not Ibrahim, it's not Nolita. It's going to be a body. It's just selling up ideas and trying to see how we can push these ideas forward. We using the carrot method of dialogue to ensure that we engage policymakers and not forceful. And I believe this would work in the long run. And it might not be spontaneous, but I definitely believe it's gonna go a long way. And just like one of our speakers mentioned, that she has an idea. The woman from Europe, I don't know, I think Anna Snick, I think her idea is amazing. I just went through the link. So we can have a lot of ways to approach this, which is not going to harm anybody, and it's not going to be threat to any political leader, not in South Africa, not in Nigeria, not in Liberia or Ghana. So I believe it's going to go a long way. And we need to do this through policy dialogue. And this is what the whole intergenerational dialogue is all about. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if there are any other questions. Please do raise your hand, because I can go on for hours asking different questions. Because on this point that Pasco's raising, and on your response, Ibrahim, my one challenge is that a negotiation assumes that you can reason with someone, and once you've reasoned with them, that they will behave differently. But also part of the reason why we have so many frustrations is that it's not that the visions don't exist. They are visions, like I said at the start of the session, the vision of Africa Day and what it was meant to accomplish, etc. Visions exist, but actions don't match that. You even made a point about sometimes people get into positions and they get lost in the position, and then the actual transformation doesn't happen. So my understanding of Pasco's provocation is that, one, this big dissonance exists of people knowing what to do, or maybe people having an understanding of what to do, and then people not then behaving in a way that will bring that change. So I think a question that I have actually for both of you to please maybe provide a short answer on what can be done then to bridge that. What are the opportunities that we have to bridge that gap between knowing and acting?
Can I start? Okay. I think the first approach, or the always approach, not even just first, it has been the approach that has proven to work all around the world, is partnership. Nolita, if one organization or yourself would go and say, oh, I want to do this, nobody's going to listen. Accountability demands you to partner. And this is why the goal 16 of the SDGs that talks about strong institutions does really matter. For you to be able to influence policy as an individual is next to impossible. But when voices are beginning to come together, when you have civil society coming into play, we are built to mobilize forces for a cause that does really matter. Trust me, you're going to make a very, very massive transformation. It can be very tiring. It can be very frustrating. It can be, disheartening to see what is happening at the top. But I think bottom-up approach, dual, bottom-up, top-down, whatever approach should be based on negotiations, as I mentioned. And if you feel the negotiation will not work, trust me, revolution will not work either. We know what's happening today in Sudan. It still goes back to leadership. I'm sorry to say that, but that's it. It's still about the hunger for power. It's still about some people who want to be in position. Until we begin to change that narrative, until we begin to change the worldview of young African, not to see leadership position as until when you become governor or president or in a position of such influence, can you be able to make significant impact? We're still going to keep roaming around and keep the same conversation for decades. So small things does really matter. And whoever move the mountain, start up by picking up with stones. So I am a person of diplomacy. I'm a person of dialogue, and I believe in negotiations, whether be it policy, be it whatever negotiation it is, it's going to be, at the end of the day, good for both parties. And accountability, holding our government accountable doesn't mean going online and saying, I want to do this, and we begin to insult and begin to rant, it's not going to work. It's going to take longer than we can imagine. We should understand that the best way to do this, whilst we have the tools like our mobile phone and technology in a world that is ever globalized, is through dialogue, and it's through constructive criticism. You know, we need to partner, foster collaboration among ourselves as individuals and as organizations, and we need to engage government bodies. Whatever it is that we're doing, if we try to neglect the people who are at the helm of affairs, it's just going to still end in vain, I think. So we should be able to see how we can continue to push. It might be difficult. I mean, nobody's telling you that it will be easy, but try and continue to try to remind them remind yourself why you started, and to remind the people in power why they need to do what they need to do. Baby steps. I trust it will work in the end.
Thank you. Sizwe, what do you think?
I think it was very powerful, Yunus. You said a lot of things, some I agree with, some not so much. But I think that's a discussion we're going to have on the side. What was important, the most important thing, which I think I clapped for, hope you remind me, please do. Nolita, can you remind me? Well, you don't know.
On which part? No, I don't remember which exactly you were clapping.
Yeah, but you said, okay, firstly, yes, accountability. And so I'm a person of diplomacy as well, and I'm an activist, so I can be radical, and I know when to do that. So I think everyone has a place within this fight for democracy, this fight for, you know, moving Africa to the next phase. Taking, for instance, Malema, Julius Malema, if you know him, is a South African politician. He has a place because, yes, he's passionate and he's loud and he gets angry. We need that. And someone like Cyril Ramaphosa, who can sit, you know, in a table around white men who run America, can also, you know, serve, you know, the movement in a way, because he can, you know, take whatever Malema is saying and put it in a more, you know, diplomatic way. So everyone, but like the question is, how do we all come together as activists who are on the ground, as people who are diplomatic, who can sit down and have, you know, heated and important conversations without fighting, because we don't need fighting now. We all need to work together, black or white, rich or poor. That's really important for moving us forward. So you touched on a really, you know, some great topics there, but some things I think we will still have a very interesting debate on the side. But I really respect the work that you're doing, and I think we need more of yous and all of us here. You know.
Thank you. These circles have a bad habit of getting incredibly fiery in the last few minutes of the call. But Robyn, I saw that you had your hand raised. If you don't mind, please share what your question was going to be, and then please go ahead.
Thank you, Nolita. So this has been just such a wonderful conversation. Thank you, everybody. And I guess, well, I'll reposition it as a question then. But, you know, thinking about the conversation about how we facilitate and host and generate spaces for connection and relationality, and for transitioning from customary ways of engaging, which are fairly entrenched in own position, and really practicing the skills, because they do require practicing the skills of moving, you know, to use like a theory or Otto Scharmer's conceptual framework, from this sort of downloading, like just taking on at face value the information coming at me, through to the debate, which is really, you know, standing in my position. And there is a place for that. So Sizwe, you know, to be able to stand in your position when you are faced by a flood of things that are not how they should be, is important. It has an important role, but to move then through that into the dialogic space. So, you know, Yunus, what you were talking about, our ability to really drop our boundaries a little bit, open up the windows to open up the doors and just take a step outside and really perceive another's experience and reality. But there's a step beyond that that I think our time is now calling for, which is this generative engagement, so presencing. So stepping, keeping our perspective, but actually being able to step into sensing what is wanting to emerge, what is possible to emerge. How do we get into a co-creative space? How do we really liberate ourselves sufficiently from our own perspective to listen for what's possible and what we would like to see emerge, and a future that we can't envisage on the basis of what's gone before, even though it may be informed by what's gone before. And that is skill that needs practicing. So the work, Anne, that you spoke about is so important. So I guess let me reposition it as a question. How can we advocate, and how can we intentionally go about creating not one or two, not exemplars, but a capacity across our system? How do we diffuse that capacity for holding spaces for generative engagement across our system? What is it going to take for us to do that? Thanks, Nolita.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Robyn. I'm not sure if anyone wants to share a response to what Robyn has shared, but also Mercy, I saw you had a provocation on the chat, if you don't mind to just voice that out. We are in the last few minutes of our call, so please do share, and then if anyone has a response, to please keep it a little bit short so we can get to the next part of the call. Thank you.
Robyn, could you please repeat the question?
Sure. What is it, what is it going to take for us to diffuse our capacity to hold generative engagements through our system? So how do we hold more spaces like this, where we've moved past debate, we've moved past dialogue, and we've really settled into relationality and trust, and we are able to step out of our fixed perceptions in order to listen to what wants to emerge?
That's a powerful question, and I don't know how to answer it, but it's interesting. It's something that I think, it's powerful. But I think, I think the work that everyone is doing, in our positions and in our interactions with people, because, for a system like that, or waiting to see what emerges, we need to include each and everyone, even the rich, even the poor, even the whites, even the blacks, even the Indians. We need to include everyone. But now, you see, what happened with Africa is that we've lost our culture and understanding of a lot of things. So, projects like understanding what happened to us are important, because and understanding is not now saying, let us go and fight. It's understanding to grow and learn and say, okay, how can we unlearn and learn to move forward together? Because we're in an interesting time in the world right now. And these conversations need to be shared. We need to have more of these, but not so much that we're not doing the work and the action involved, but we need more of these, whether it's in schools. How do we get these conversations in schools? How do we create these dialogues in schools, in local areas, in rural areas? How do we get that? Because all of those, when they come together, they're going to create this beautiful piece of what the future could potentially be. So your question is layered in every sense of it, and it's beautiful. And I wish we could unpack it together in another day, because I think time is not on our side.
Thank you, Sizwe. Like I said earlier, okay, Pascal has a question, but for it to please be the last question. These sessions have a habit of getting too good when we're at the end of the session. But Pascal, please go ahead. Sorry, Pascal, I'm really struggling to hear you. The connection is...
Malinga was trying to reply, of how can we ensure that we have
Pascal, I'm not sure if you can hear me. We're really struggling to hear you. If you can please type your question on the chat. No, sorry, we can't hear you.
What I'm trying, it's like a supplement to the question that has been asked. We have embraced an inclusive approach strategy, especially in developing the.
Okay, he's dropped off the call. His connection was not very good. Mercy, please add your comment, and then we're gonna go ahead.
Sorry, first of all, I was late, but I really feel like I missed so many great discussions. I hope you can hear me. I also have a cold, so yeah, my voice is very coarse. But and I think this is something we cannot discuss now, like Malinga said. Maybe it's something we can take on in the next meeting. But for me, as an African, you know, we were talking about what are we learning, and I'm asking myself, yeah, like we need to learn, but I'm asking myself, what are we learning? First of all, because as a young African, I've learned a lot. I've gone through the entire almost education system. But what I have learned, the question is, how does it add to building Africa? First of all, I really think the biggest challenge, in my opinion, is that we lack autonomy as Africans to make our own decisions. Because when we talk about partnerships, negotiations, creating spaces, all these things, there are not, in my opinion, very humble opinion, there are not original ideas that are African. They don't really entirely represent Africanism. They do partly, but they come from, I don't want to say the word foreign, but they're in a way foreign, in my opinion. We need, as Africans, to go back to the drawing boards and start from there. I really think we have to go back to the start and start kind of making our own decisions that represent us. Because right now we kind of follow, in a way, what is there, but the things that are there, do they represent us? Do they represent our value systems? Do they represent our beliefs? Do they represent the things that we know? And that's the problem, because now Malinga say that, yeah, we are losing our values, we're losing our culture. It's because we are learning and taking in things that are foreign to us. How do you expect your mother tongue to compete with English? No, you're definitely going to forget your mother language, because you're busy learning and trying to learn everything else that is foreign. So for me, in my opinion, is we need to sit down and think about ideas that represent us. And I'm also sorry to say that it might look like I'm a prophet of doom, but for us, it might be, in a way, not too late, but a little bit late. That is why I always have hope in the younger generation, because they still have time to adapt and modify and change some things. While for us, we are trying to pay the next bill. Because always also the thing I struggle with is, where do I draw the boundary line? I'm also passionate, like Malinga. Sometimes I get fired up, but then you also realize that you have to have a boundary line. But some things need diplomacy, some things need the fire. But where do you draw that, okay, here it's diplomacy, here it's fire? In my opinion, everything needs fire if Africa is to catch up, but we cannot use fire all the time. But how do you draw that boundary line? How do you, keep your opinion heard and while also understanding that you need people, you need the partnerships. I don't know if I make sense, but these are also still questions that maybe I'd like to stimulate all of us as we end the session today to think about, that what can we do as Africans, things that represent us, things that are not foreign. You know, we are now working with our SDGs, but do they represent us? Do they represent Africa? I'm going to end there.
Thank you for that, Mercy. I'm sorry, we really do not have time to answer the question in this particular session, but as you know, we meet every month, and these themes, the questions that Mercy is asking, these are themes that we continue to elaborate on, and we continue to move, like I said earlier, from a very good discussion, a very fiery discussion, to what do we then do about it. I'm going to add a link to the chat, Mercy, on an initiative that we have been working on in the Club Room to explore this question that you're saying about what does it mean when we do things from our own sense of what should be happening, etc., especially exploring the cultural dimension of Africanness and what does Africanness mean, what does Africanness look like. So I am sharing the link here, and also interestingly enough, one of the lead authors is here on the call with us today, Christopher Mvunelo. I will, though, get to the point of us closing the call. First of all, every meeting, we do a round of news for everyone to just quickly, in like 30 seconds, if you have anything to share with the members of the circle, any invitations to make with the members of the circle, please do go ahead and raise your hand to share them now. If there's any news, and then Katherine, please also add the link to the WhatsApp group on the chat, because this news will also be reiterated to everyone who's on the WhatsApp group. Yeah. Yande, I see you have your hand raised.
Hi, thank you, Nolita. I'm happy to be in this space. Let me just turn on my camera. Hi, everybody. Yande from Restless Development. I'm the Power Shifting Director. I just wanted to share that we'll be launching our State of the Youth Civil Society research that focuses on feminist movements this July. So I'll share a link to our launch event. Really, really exciting research on how young feminists are navigating the shrinking civic political space. I think it ties in with some of what the speakers were speaking to today on how we self-define as African movements and as African feminists as well. So thanks.
Thank you. Can you add that on the chat, and any links to how to get in touch or participate in any of this, please add them to the chat. And again, it will then be shared in the WhatsApp group for future reference. Does anyone else have any news? Katherine, you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Nolita, and thanks for doing such a great job facilitating today. I really have enjoyed the session a lot, and I agree completely with Nolita that it's a pity that we always run out of time just when the discussion gets super fired up. But really, thank you to everyone for coming for that. I just wanted to share that, so Tom Ogalo, who joined us in the beginning as the third speaker, he is a LearningPlanet Youth Fellow, and we are currently about to extend our call for applications for Youth Fellows for the next round this year to join us at the LearningPlanet. And I will share the link in the chat, and it's also in the meeting notes for everyone to nominate young people between the ages of 12 to 25 who are game changers in their communities or who are leaders, as Ibrahim was mentioning earlier. And you can nominate youth fellows there, and they can join our youth fellows community. We have a youth council and a whole system going, and I think it's a really exciting place to be and meet young people across the world. So if you're interested in that, please follow the link in the chat and in the notes. Thanks.
Thank you, Katherine. Does anyone else have news for the community? Okay, I see Robyn, you'd added something on the chat. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Nolita. Yeah, so just to say, I've put into the chat as well. So our Africa Voices dialogues happen every 4 to 6 weeks, and our next one, if anybody does have an interest in research for Africa's education specifically, but it's a very broad concept, education. So really thinking about learning on the continent. How does learning happen? What does learning look like? What does Africa-centric learning feel like? And how do we articulate that story? And how do we grow our own genuine voice for our continent. We are having a think tank session, so it's think tank on research for Africa's education. It's on the 27th, and which is a Saturday, and so a little bit tricky, but it's on the 27th, and yeah, I think it's going to be a very, very interesting conversation, and hopefully some exciting potential and possibility to emerge from it. Yes, and I know John very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Robyn. Well, we're at the last minute of our call, and so we've reached the closing. But I wanted to share one last thing about, you know, the development of the circle and the work that we're doing, and also all of this energy that we're sharing, all of this collaboration that we're sharing. Oh, Livan, okay. Can you please just 30 seconds, please, your news?
Okay, thank you, Nolita, Katherine, and other participants. Only I would like to congratulate this valuable day. I'm Livan from Somalia, Executive Director of Teach for Somalia, which is a local organization working on quality education, advocating for children's rights. Congratulations all to this valuable day. We can make a difference to African youth, to African continent. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome. Okay, so on the closing part, as I shared in the start of this call, we have begun to transition into diving deeper into some of the themes and the insights that we're having in these conversations. They're over the more than a year of our discussions, we're getting more and more recurring themes, recurring asks, recurring actionables that that we're also all unanimously saying we need to start developing the responses to some of these things. Every call we've noted some of these gaps and that we believe would make sense for us as a community to pursue precisely. Sorry, I just need to mute someone, I'm getting distracted. Thank you. For us as a community to pursue more precisely, and that to develop also, as I said earlier, the responses to this. So as a result, we're creating, as part of the circle, we're creating an additional space as a working group that will likely meet the week after this community call that we have every month to collaborate on building said responses. So we keep the space for this fiery, this in-depth discussion, bringing in the speakers and the themes that we are continuing to look into every month through the course of the year. But now we're creating an additional space to then to develop a working group towards what types of initiatives and what types of responses would we like to create based on the themes coming out of the circle. So with that said, because it's a working group, we would like to keep it a little bit smaller at first as we try to figure out what that could look like. If you would like to make any nominations for people to join this group and join this discussion, please do feel free to email Katherine. Katherine is the email that the calendar invites come in from anyway. So everyone should have this email already. Please do email Katherine to express your interest or to make a nomination. And with that said, we're at the end of our Africa Day, Africa Month session of the Ubuntu Learning Circle. Thank you so much to everyone who has joined. I look forward to seeing you again next month to continue the conversation. And also I look forward to seeing all of the nominations and expression of interest for our working group as we, as I said, probably too many times in this call, moving from conversation to acting and thinking boldly. So have a good morning, everyone. Thank you.